This is Tracy Drummond, archivist for the Southern Labor Archives today. I'm here today with James Allen Preston, interviewing him about many aspects of his two very different careers and about his life in general. This is for the African Americans in Transportation project at the Southern Labor Archives. Today is Wednesday, October 12th, 2016, and we're in North Hollywood, California for the interview. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this project.
Oh, it's a pleasure, actually.
And for working with my strange schedule while I'm out here in California.
Hey, I'm an old hand at strange schedules.
So let me start where I always start with these interviews, which is where and when were you born?
I was born the 13th of November 1932 in Garfield Hospital in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Yes.
And tell me about your parents. What did they do? Do you know how they met?
No, I do not. My father was from Roanoke, Virginia, and he was an auto mechanic. I knew he was a master mechanic, and I know how they met. He was a chauffeur for a family that she worked for as a maid, and she was from Marlboro, Rockville County, Maryland, farm. It's a very interesting situation.
It was her family's farm?
Yeah.
Okay.
My grandfather and grandmother had 14 children, and the city of Washington was bordered by Maryland and Virginia, of course, but you know, when you got to the district line, a lot of people still had kerosene lamps and outhouses. The roads outside of Washington in Maryland and Virginia sometimes were dirt roads with no lights. But they met in Washington, I think, or Maryland, working for the same family. And he opened the garage, and she stopped working, and they were doing fairly well, I guess, until the Depression.
How long before the Depression was that? Do you know?
Well,
How long were they married before?
I don't know. My sister was born a year before I was. She was born 1931, so, and they were married then. And when my father left, I must have been 5, and there was not much talk about him in terms of history, his history. It came a time when she told us to tell people that our father was dead because we couldn't explain where he was or why he wasn't there. Right. And I think it probably came to a point where we began to believe that.
Was it difficult then for a single woman at the time?
I think during the Depression, the black female had an easier time getting employed than the male.
Mm-hmm. No, but I mean to be single or to be in a situation where...
Oh, it was extremely difficult. We moved from the house that we lived in, which was on Sherman Avenue in Washington, which was upper Northwest, to 15th and P Street, 1523 P Street. And it was a white frame house with green frames around the window, and had a small yard in the front and a fence. And we took in roomers. I lived in a hall room, which was the size of a hall. My sister and my mother shared a room, we had a couple called the Greenfields, who must have been in their 50s, who lived in the room next to mine. And then there was another room, and I can't remember who was in there, but then there was a few steps down in the bathroom. And on the first floor, there was a guy named Tom Sawyer, who lived with his mother, whose name was Parthena Owens.
Parthena?
Parthena.
Parthena, with a P.
Yeah,
Okay.
Owens. And Parthena was probably 60, 70 years old, and Tommy was 40. He was short, stocky, wore glasses, and the only time he took his glasses off was probably to go to sleep or to fight. And Tommy liked to fight.
Did he look for trouble, or was he trained as a boxer?
I don't know. I don't know what Tommy's thing was. I mean, he was one of the characters who lived in that house. Parthenia, I think she probably had dementia. I don't know. When my mother was disciplining me, I could hear Parthenia yelling, "Come into axe and kill him!" You know. So you know, it was a rather bizarre. And we had one bathroom. The kitchen that led to the backyard, we had a woodshed, and there was a big iron stove in the kitchen. And a back stairs, and my sister and I would sit on the back stairs at the top of the stairs and listen to the older people around the kitchen table at night talking, conversations that they were having. I mean, this was of great interest to us because they did not talk to us. It was the saying, children are meant to be seen, not to be heard. So they did not talk to us. We did not have conversations with adults. I think that was a handicap. I think that the fact that people have started, you know, at some point started to talk to their children, you know, made growing up less of a culture shock when you had to, you know, to deal out in public. But in 1939, Marian Anderson, who was great contralto, was invited to sing at Constitution Hall in Washington, and somewhere along the line, they had to have known she was black. The Daughters of the American Revolution ran, were the, they were the people who were the caretakers, I suppose, of Constitution Hall, said that no, she couldn't sing there. Well, Eleanor Roosevelt decided that, okay, she was a member of the DAR, and she resigned and arranged to have Marian Anderson sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Well, my mother got us up at 6 o'clock, I guess, in the morning. We got dressed, she made these lunches in this brown bag, and we started to walk. And we were walking to the Lincoln Memorial. And in Washington, every part of it somehow runs into a circle someplace or another. And we'd stop at the circles and maybe have a bite to eat and some water or whatever, and hoof it again. Well, we made it to the Lincoln Memorial. It was people all over. And I think we got there early, and all I remember was she opened with My Country 'Tis of Thee, because I passed out. I was 7 at the time, and we walked there because we only had car fare one way, and that we definitely wouldn't have been able to ride there and then walk back. So it was, my mother tried to expose us to as many as many things as she could. She was a hell of a disciplinarian, but she did care that we knew what was going on. I mean, we went to Catholic school. And we went to Catholic school because my mother was a contralto in her own right. A priest came, a young priest to this St. Augustine parish, who I always, when I think of Father Wagner, it reminds me of Bing Crosby and Going My Way. This Wagner wanted to build a school in this St. Augustine parish for the blacks in this neighborhood. The big church was sort of going downtown. It was on M Street, we were on P Street, and from P Street going west, I guess, it was all the black neighborhood. And he wanted to put, there was a St. Augustine's church in that neighborhood on our street, and this was the St. Augustine's for the black people. We could go to the St. Augustine's for the white people, but we'd have to stand in the back. So he went about this neighborhood to the churches, heard the singers, and he found the best of them, and he propositioned them. He said, I want to start a choir. I want to build a school. If you sing in my choir, I'll let your kids go to parochial school and they won't have to pay. My mother wanted us to go to parochial school, so she said, okay.
Was your mother Catholic?
No. No, she came out of Baptist. I mean, Maryland was a Catholic state, the only Catholic state there in the 13 colonies, but no, not in, you know. But she was enterprising, I say, so she said, okay. So we went to Catholic school. I started in the kindergarten with Agnes, and I repeated kindergarten because they said I wasn't old enough and mature enough to go on to the first grade. And I had 3 friends that who were lifelong friends who also, it was a substitute for daycare. They just put us in the kindergarten, but we weren't supposed to be starting at the time, so we had to repeat the kindergarten. And what he did was he asked, when he finally got this choir together, he asked the parishioners not to go to the 12 o'clock high mass. And so the high mass was wide open for anybody in the city. And here this group of black Baptist singers do Gregorian was a whole other thing. It became very popular, it made a lot of money, and he built the school.
Finish what you're saying.
Well, he must have had more women with crushes than Brad Pitt. But
How long did your mother sing in the choir?
She was there when I left. I mean, she finally transferred me out of Catholic school because it was not working out. Being behind Agnes. The nuns and I just didn't make it. So she put me in public school.
You found it to be too strict an environment?
Oh, the nuns were dealt in corporal punishment. They were serious. I mean, they would hit you with a ruler, you know, on your knuckles, with, you know, and slam you against the wall. I mean, they just were. Look, I mean, you know, there were these women who obviously were afraid of life. I mean, you can be Christian and whatever without giving up everything, you know. So that to me, as I grew older, and Agnes had two friends who became nuns, and they thought that, you know, Agnes was going to be a nun. I don't think my mother had any objections to that. I don't think that was something she encouraged, but you know.
Were there both black and white kids at the school?
No.
Okay.
I never had a white teacher or went to school with a white person up to college, because I went to one of the Negro colleges. So my exposure to integration was the service, when I went into service. But
well, let's back up a minute. How long did she have the boarding house?
well, it wasn't a boarding house because she didn't feed the people.
Oh, okay.
It was a rooming house.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, how long did she have a rooming house?
As long as she lived. She died when I was 15. And my Aunt Virgie, who was my mother's baby sister, the youngest of the girls, came in as a legal guardian, and we didn't hit it off, so I left at 16 and went on my own. She wanted me to get a job and bring money home. I wanted to play sports. That was my thing, and I ended up getting a job anyway, but then it worked out so I could play sports, and I rented a room in Southeast Washington, a hall room, another hall room, and I was there until college.
So your mom had the rooming house, but she also worked outside of the...
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We couldn't. I mean, you know, we couldn't have made it just on that. Either way, you know. No, she had the job.
What kind of work did she do?
She worked for the man who owned the Evening Star newspaper. His name was Stone. He was a Canadian, and it was in Spring Valley. And the man that she was directly under, his name was Gus Quarles. He was a man of maybe about 5'3", 5'4", lemon complexion. His wife, Mamie, was 5'10". She was really dark. He was really light. They were like saltwater geechees. They were from Charleston, South Carolina, and Stone had lived there, and he had brought them with him. And Gus was a very powerful man because he worked for a very powerful man. The rest of the people in the valley, Stone was a man who owned the newspaper, so all kinds of congressmen or whatever came to dinner when they were invited, and Gus knew who to put next to who. He got all the gossip for Stone from the other servants who worked for the other people in the valley, and it made him a very important man. He and Mamie had no children, so I was like his adopted son.
What did your mom do for the paper, or do for them?
Cleaned their house.
In their house.
Served dinners when they had big dinner parties. She finally, you know, ended up running all the cleaning people in the house, the maids and everybody. under Gus, who was Stone's valet and butler. Gus used to complain because Stone, when he took a vacation, he'd say, "Gus, we are taking a vacation," because somebody had to be there to put his clothes together and whatever.
What impact did it have on you and your sister with your mom working so much?
My sister, it had a drastic impact on her. I mean, this was what made her path towards a higher education such a driving force, because she was never going to have that happen to her. You know, we had Sunday clothes, but we never really felt like we were poor because there were people who were poorer. But we did at times have the cardboard in the shoes because of the hole in the soles. But we were never hungry, and sometimes things were skimpy, but we got through. You know, it was I missed not having a father or a big brother. Most of the kids in my neighborhood, had more than one brother or so, you know. And I get in a fight with the kids my age, and they go home and get their brother. So, but you know, and you know, you grow up into your early teens, learning stuff on the street that your father would tell you that, you know, and that was not good, you know. So but you know, she tried to be you know, take up the space of both parents, but it didn't work. I mean, it really didn't work. I mean, like I said, she was a hard disciplinarian, and there were times that I was just really, you know, it became a sadistic thing that she would say, "You know what you did, and you're going to get a spanking, you're going to get a whipping." And it wouldn't happen until 3 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, I knew the love was there, but it was frustrating because she didn't know how to make the adjustment of communications to say, "Okay, listen, let's talk about this. No, you do this, and you do this because I say so." And it, you know, sometimes that was impossible. But that, you know, we had, there were people, and there were men in my life. There was an Episcopalian minister who organized the baseball team in my neighborhood. And he got me out of a few scrapes, and he and his wife had no children, and he was very proud of me as an athlete. And my track coach, and you know, there were some male images that I had that did serve me well. I mean, it was like, what was it going to be? I mean, I was out there, and when they, when other boys' fathers took them on fishing trips, sometimes they'd take me. Sometimes I'd be left out of that, but there were 3 guys who I went to college with. We ran track in high school together, and they became like my brothers. Only one of them is alive now. One became, one was a really, really tough Washington detective. His first day on the police force, a couple of kids robbed a liquor store, and he ran them down. They must have been the most surprised people in the world. He was this guy, 6'5", coming down on them. But he became a detective, and then he became head of White House Police. That was Buck Wheeler, and Jim Courtney became superintendent of the schools in New Haven, Connecticut, and Jim Young was a gangster, and he died. Would you like to see a picture of him?
I would love to see a picture of him.
I'll show you. I think my sister's kind of was kind of my librarian. She kept getting stuff. This was something that Courtney's wife had collected for him. This is the 4 of us. That's Duck, the one who was the cop. That's me. That's Courtney, who was the superintendent, and that's Jim Young, who was the gangster. And this is how much better I was than everybody who I ran against.
These are fantastic.
Yeah, they were newspaper things that Courtney's wife had kind of collected for me.
That's great. This is an awesome photo.
This was Tony Waitman's sports show. It was we were the first group of people to be on that live television show in Washington. We and Georgetown's team was the pride of DC. They were the best college mile and 2-mile team in the country, and we were the best high school.
I want to talk to you about high school. You said that you were 16 when your Aunt Virgie came to take over the rooming house.
Yeah, I was 15. I think I was 15. I was 16. I know.
Did she come to help your mom, or?
No, it was after my mother died.
Okay.
No, I know I could get a work permit at 16, so I know I must have been 16 because I remember getting a Social Security card. And you had to be 16 to get a Social Security card. Agnes and I, when I was 17, Agnes and I put up our ages and worked as elevator operators at a big hotel apartment complex. She went to Catholic University in Washington. Stayed with her. They were a great school, and she had some friends who were Jesuits who were very well educated, and when I came home on leave from the service, the four of us sat down at Agnes's kitchen table and drank 2 quarts of gin. There were some wild guys. We used to play basketball against them, and on Saturday afternoons, guys from the neighborhood would take a team out to the monastery at Catholic U, and they played dirty. And then the nuns would feed us breakfast. There were some rough guys. They were serious people.
Was the elevator operator job the first job you held?
Oh no. I worked in a brick kiln with my cousin Bobby. Carried groceries at this, the whole, newspapers and all that, the whole number. I had a few jobs.
Were you expected to contribute from an early age?
I did. Any entertainment or extras that we did, was always up to me, not Agnes, because she did a lot of the stuff at home. I mean, she cooked dinner sometimes. So I had, I did the jobs, but my mother knew. I mean, and she was happy that I was an athlete, because when I was 4 or 5, I had asthma and a sinus condition, and it was like she kept me in. She had me taking piano lessons, and the piano's in front of the window. I'm looking out the window, and my Aunt Margaret finally said, "Let him go out there and play. If it kills him, it kills him." So she did, and it went away, Aunt Margaret was the sister that my mother had left the farm with, and she was probably one of the most obscene women I've ever met in my life. But she was very philosophic. Extremely philosophic. She's my sister. When my sister was 17, she'd say, and Agnes would complain to her about one of her impediments, and Margaret would say, "Don't you ever tell a man what you think is wrong with you, because he might not see it, and he might even like it, but you can convince him real easy." She's a funny lady. I never knew really any of my father's family. I met, I think, his sister Charlotte, and there was an Antoinette Preston who was in summer school with me. My mother was very dark. My father was very fair. It's like part Cherokee and part African. We have had, I think, problems with that since slavery. Mulatto versus pure black. And never the twains met in terms of their families, my mother's family or my father's family. So when he left, I mean, that was the end of any association. Till I was, I think, 6. My mother never said anything negative about him. I mean, never.
Do you know why he left?
yeah, it was money. I mean, his business failed because of the depression, and he was in all kinds of debt up to his neck. And I guess he was facing jail.
Okay.
So he vamoosed. And you know, it was. He came when we were. I think I was 15. He came. He was living in Philadelphia or New Jersey, I'm not sure. And he came and spent 2 days there, and then I didn't see him again until I was 27, I think. His sister called Agnes, and Agnes called me and said, "Guess who I heard from today?" And I said, "Oh, your father's sister, my father's sister." He wanted to see us, so I was curious. You know, she called him Mr. Preston, and it was extremely cold. I mean, by this time, with me, it was an indifference. I mean, I didn't need him for anything, you know. That time had passed. But she, you know, never forgave him, and I just never forgave him. I mean, she had a visceral hate. But that was the last time. I mean, so the time he left, I saw him twice, once at 15 and once when I was 27. I got a telegram from him when I ran at the Penn Relays in Philadelphia. It was in the papers. And I got a telegram at the hotel I was staying at. That was kind of that. And you know, it was like family was something that I kind of missed, because it was like most of the time, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever, it was the three of us.
But you were still pretty young when your mother passed.
Yeah.
Had she been sick?
Yeah, she had high blood pressure, hypertension, and she had a stroke. And yeah. We never had really any problems with blood pressure because she must have always known she had high blood pressure. So I think I was in the service before I had a stake the first time in my life. I had to go to friends' houses to get fried chicken because she didn't fry anything. You know, there were, in retrospect, there were a lot of things that she did that was very caring. I mean, you know, it was like she had really bad feet, and she always made sure our shoes fit. You know, it's like all the things that she knew that bothered her, she always made sure that we never would have those same problems. And I did find her books rather interesting, especially the ones she didn't want me to read.
Like what?
Oh, the Henry Miller books, and I don't know what she thought that I would get from the Prophet Khalil Gibran, you know. But she was extremely well read. I remember once I was dusting books in the library at the Stone Mansion. These little jobs that I'd do there. And it was the first time I'd ever come across a first edition. And I pulled these books out one by one, and I was dusting them, and my mother came into the library. I said, Mom, these pages are stuck together. How can they read these books? The pages stuck together. She said, they can't. And that's all she said. She didn't say that for show. She just said, they can't, you know. And that was it, you know.
Well, what books did she share with you?
What
books did she share with you?
The ones that kids read, the Huckleberry Finn. You know, those kind of things. She was not in favor of taking us beyond our years, by no means. We were children, and we were children, you know. And that was the pity of it all.
Do you think that was a way for her to protect you?
She did her best to protect me. I mean, I understand that a lot of that was to protect me, but at the same time it made me in some ways innocent, and I had to run into a brick wall to find out. Oh, that's, you know, she just didn't know how to do that. She didn't know how, I mean, this was a situation that she never expected to be in, and she was not prepared for it. And she came from a chauvinistic world where the men would go off and take the boys with them, and they'd tell them what the facts of life and whatever. And that's what that was. I mean, that's what it was like on the farms.
Well, what was high school like for you?
Oh, I went to high school in the 9th grade. I think that high school was kind of a revelation. I mean, there were, you know, you were more on your own in terms of the way that the teachers treated you. I mean, there wasn't the same kinds of discipline. You didn't show up for class, you flunked, but nobody was going to come and get you or call your mama. There was more activities. There was more of a collage of people in high school than there were only 4 black high schools in Washington, D.C. So there were black people coming from all over the city. So you met more different people. It it was good. I mean, it was, it made me realize that school wasn't all bad. I mean, it was wanting to to enjoy the adventure of learning, whereas in junior high school and elementary school it was repetition and drudgery. Just there was no imagination. And the thing that made it very special was that we are talking about an era where a black person who was a physicist or chemist or historian, there was no job for him. And he could be the smartest historian, chemist, or physicist, or whatever, but there was no job for him except as a teacher. So our teachers were extraordinary. So that, high school was, and the teachers were able to, coming from the same environment, were able to relate, because we did come from the same environment. We don't necessarily today, but we did then because of segregation. I mean, we all knew the same things. We all dealt with the same music. We all had the same problems. So we came out of school being aware of our history, because nobody looked over anybody's shoulder. They didn't give a damn what we did, what was coming down from there. And the fact was that the only way we would get it would be from these teachers, because the books we had really did not deal with anything that had anything to do with us. So these teachers filled in so many blanks. Yes, and then there was romance. Teenage romance. Being a kid who, it took 5 of us to talk to one girl.
It took 5 of you?
One, in the streets. I mean, you're scared to death to be one-on-one with a female. I mean, high school was, that kind of, it gave you more things that you could communicate with a woman about, because you were all taking the same courses, and and they were above that other nonsense, and so you had subjects you could talk about. The coming of age time, Yeah, and then there was sports, and then there was...
What did you play?
Played football, and I ran track. And my big sport was track, and when I went to college on a track scholarship, they wouldn't let me play football. The track coach says, "We're paying for this, not the football team. And you break something, we're paying for this, not the football." So during football season, you run cross country. Yeah, okay.
In high school, was there a point where you were like, I really enjoy this and I want to go to college, or was there just an expectation that would be your next step, or how did that process work for you?
I didn't have an expectation initially of going to college, because I couldn't afford it to start with. I mean, But when I found out that I was more than competitive as an athlete, and I saw what was happening with athletes and scholarships and so forth, then I began to realize that this was my ticket. And whether or not I was interested in education or not, I was interested in pursuing the sport. So you know, they kind of fired that up, and you know, and when you find that you're good at something, you want to know just how good you are. And you know, it becomes competitive. That you turn into the total gladiator and say, "I'm going to demolish." So that, you know, it's all the things that human beings are that they suppress one way or another and end up having to go to a psychiatrist because sports allows everything you do in this society allows that competitive thing and people who suppress that end up in trouble. Thank God for sports. Imagine what these people would be like out here. I mean, these 380-pound, 6'9" guys who play football. God knows. I mean, you really wouldn't want them out here without sports. I mean, they tear your door off your car and
So, tell me again which school you got accepted to.
I had 15 scholarship offers.
You had 15 scholarship offers.
But my coach that I went to school, his name is Leroy Walker, Dr. Leroy Walker. He was the first black coach of the United States Olympic team in 1976. He became president of the United States Olympic Committee. And he was in his second year at Carolina when I was there. He came to Washington, got us in the spring of the year, took us down there to the campus, the four of us, and pulled out some senior girls and said, but Leroy was a guy who, he became the chancellor of North Carolina Central University is what it became. And Leroy had said to us, he said, you know what's ticking in your mind. You can go to all of these white schools and they can give you a lot more than we can. But you know what's happening to us? We're dying. Because now we cannot get the athletes that we once had a monopoly on. So we have no energy boost for the alumni. And we need you. We need to keep that energy going. And that was something that kind of touched you, you know, you knew that it was a reality, that it was true. It was such a beautiful campus. So that's why, you know, it was like all of us had multiple scholarships to college to run. I had more than the rest because my grades were better. But we wanted to stick together, like we'd become like brothers. I mean, Courtney had brothers, Donald Wheeler had brothers, I don't think Jim Young did, but their brothers were so much older than they were. Duck and I were in we're in kindergarten together, and we were probably taller than most of the people when we were in the first grade, and there we were, these long skinny legs and short pants and big feet. But we've been, he called me one day out here. I hadn't seen him for 20 years. And he said, "Press, I need to talk to you." He said, I took my wife out. And there was this pause because I thought he maybe killed her. He didn't kill her, he knocked her out. He was 50, maybe, 50, 55, somewhere near 60. And her son attacked him, and he threw the kid through the first floor window, big bay window. I said, "What happened then?" He said, "She cut the arms off of my suits and the legs off of my pants." He said, "And she flushed my diabetic medication." Now, this was his second wife. The woman he married, Gloria, he was dating when we were in high school. And she was in a Catholic school in Baltimore. They married, they had 2 sons and a daughter. And he divorced Gloria somewhere along the line and married some other woman. Well, I said, "Look, you're on retirement now, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Can you afford to pay this woman and be, and live outside of that situation?" He said, "No." I said, "Then you better go back there and sweet talk her and make sure that gets all straightened out. And somewhere along the line, work out a more equitable arrangement to get out of that." So he did. And I didn't hear from him for a while again. And then one day he called me and he said, "Press," he said, "I was driving around the block about 5 times and I couldn't find my house." Now, there's this thing about the police. Once they retire, those guys who are still working, don't want nothing to do with them anymore. I mean, that relationship is over. While he was with the police department, then he didn't deal with us. But Courtney came down from Connecticut to Washington. The duck had cancer. And what happened was the parish priest who married them and Duck was dying. I mean, he was dying. The parish priest who married them said that there was a discrepancy in their marriage because this woman was non-Catholic and blah, 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 blah. And he had that second marriage annulled. And on his deathbed, Duck remarried Gloria, his first wife. And Gloria got everything when he died. She called me once. Her son was out here. Her second son was out here, and she couldn't find him. He wouldn't call her. He lost. He was using her credit card, so she knew he was out here, but she couldn't find him, and he wouldn't call her. And she kept calling the place where he was living. He had a roommate. And she said, "Find him." I said, "Gloria, she said, "You have the phone number of where he lives. Find him." I said, "Okay." So I called, and his roommate answered. And I said, "Where's Donnie? I want to speak to Donnie." He said, "I don't know where Donnie is. I haven't seen Donnie, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Okay. You tell Donnie that Preston called." I said, "He'll know who Preston is. Preston is a friend of his father. Did you know Donnie's father?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Preston is just like Donnie's father." I got a call in 20 minutes. So again, so I said, "Hey boy, call your mother." He said, "Well, I said, just call her. You know, I don't know what your thing is, but call her." He called her. You know. He said, "Can I come out and see you?" I said, "Sure, anytime, you know." You know, it was like, he was like his father. His kids were scared to death of him. You know, it's like, damn, don't they learn anything? You know, it's like, and this was a big guy. I mean, this is in high school.
Mm-hmm. So, was going to North Carolina, was that the first time you'd really been in the South?
I was born in the South. Where do you think Washington, D.C. is?
Well, there's South and there's, I mean...
Oh, there's South and there's South, yeah. Yeah, that was the first time I'd been to the Deep South. We always referred to places like, people would say, "I'm from New York," and we'd say, "Oh, you're from up South," you know, but yeah, it was, and it, the thing about, you know, being on the campus, it was a universe of its own. Going downtown was another thing. I mean, and what was even more strange about it, my freshman year, well, just before we had to be there before the students came in, because we started training, and when the students started coming in, I remember being on the main campus, looking up at the sophomore dorm, and there were all these people. There must have been about 15 people, and they were obviously together in front of this dorm. And I said to one of the guys who had been on the campus there, I said, "I thought this was the only black people in the school here." And he said, "That's right." I said, "Well, who are all those white people?" He said, "Oh, they're not white people, those are the Weavers." And I said, "The Weavers?" He said, "Yeah, they're from a place called Ahoskie, North Carolina. They all look like that." Well, apparently there was another city, Stanhope, which was pretty much the same. We had little clusters like that in Washington. People, the Proctors, the Tapscotts, totally mulattoes, and they only married people who looked like them. Now, before the people downtown in Durham got to know those people, you had a little trouble when you went downtown with one of those ladies. But I found the South. It's like we did a project. My daughter Scotty, Agnes's best friend's son and his girlfriend, and a guy named Davis Lacey for KCET on Richard Wright. It was a biography of Richard Wright. I did the voiceover. Scotty was in Stockholm, Sweden for 15 years, and Quinn and his girlfriend Dina went to Columbia. Dina spoke fluent French, and Richard Wright was both in Sweden and in Paris. And when they went to dig up all the historical information, where they found it was at Ole Miss, and they found that Ole Miss had the largest collection of black history in the country. It was all archived there, and they were extremely generous with allowing you to use that. I created a theater program in a school called Tougaloo in Mississippi. I was paid by an organization called Affiliate Artists out of New York, and I'd go down at leisure. I was doing a soap opera called Another World at the time, and doing theater also in New York. Mississippi was an interesting trip also. Some of the students, when I told them I was in New York, they immediately had an attitude. I had come down from New York. They immediately had an attitude, and they explained to me the lay of the land, that what we have that you don't have is we own land. And true it was, and at the time, they may as well not have, because the government had subsidized people not to plant. And it was going through that state, because I went to a lot of schools and did one-man shows and stuff like that. Old people sitting on porches like they were waiting to die, because the younger people had got the hell out of there. There was no place for them to work, nothing for them to do. They'd gone to Chicago or Detroit, someplace like that, and there was the fields just laid out there, fallow, nothing. It was like. I used to say you can always tell how well a city is doing economically, whether or not they have a professional football team, a professional baseball team, a professional basketball team. And Mississippi and Alabama, places like Arkansas. And it's, that kind of. And you think of the billions of dollars that are spent on sports, and how much money they generate. You talk about athletes and the salaries they make. These people want to pay them more, but the government has put a salary cap on how much they pay them, because they don't get it all at once. This is escrow money that the owners say this is what we pay them, but they get to invest this money because these guys don't get it all at once. Mm-hmm. So the sports industry would go as far as they can. And so we're here, been without a football team for about 15 years or so. Biggest media market in the world. the Rams have come back to town. Because the billionaires who own it say, what the hell are we going to do in St. Louis? It's L.A., you know. You know. So, you know, the thing about sports in my culture, there have been the two alternatives, and one was entertainment and one was sports. So, since I was a child, you know, there was always those two things that parents were pushing their children towards, because that was one way of getting out. You know, the only way of getting into the mainstream, per se. And so, you know, sports heroes were always, you know, I remember the nights in the summer when Joe Louis fought. Radios would be in the windows, every house in the neighborhood, and people would be sitting on the front. In the wintertime, at the end of the fight, when it was announced that he won, all the doors would open and people run out in the snow, screaming. And he was the guy that your parents would never tell you to be like. But, you know, he was, you know, the guy who did Step and Fetch It. One day, Norman Lear said to me, Jay, I want you to meet somebody. I was on a series for Norman at the time, called All's Fair with Richard Crenna and Bernadette Peters. We lasted a season. He said, I want you to meet somebody. And I said, okay. So he took me down to his set and he said, I tried to introduce John Amos to him, but John Amos would not talk to him. So he introduced me to Lincoln Perry, who did Step and Fetch It. This man was nothing like that character. He was rather reticent about meeting me initially because he didn't know how I was going to react. He knew I was old enough to, you know. But I said, you know, if things had been different when you were playing, if we had had Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier doing starring roles, then you probably would have been considered the greatest mime of all time. I said, I'm looking at you, and I don't, you know, I said I did theater in New York for 10 years, and people would come backstage and they would stand back and look at you because they wanted to see whether you were like that character that you just played. And that was a form of flattery, I mean, that they had to come and check. I said, that's what you are. I'm looking at you and I don't see that guy that you played at all. But these were some of the things that we faced growing up that were humiliating. And motion pictures was our chief source of entertainment. I mean, because it was the least expensive. We didn't go to plays. I mean, you know, that was out the window. Movie pictures.
Well, we've talked through your college, but you haven't mentioned acting once, or any impact that going to the movies might have made on you as a kid.
Oh.
I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about that now?
Well, that was not that was not in my life. That was not something that I even contemplated. I mean, Hollywood might as well, or acting may as well have been on the moon. I never even knew. My freshman year in college, Ivan Dixon, I don't know whether you know who Ivan Dixon is. Ivan Dixon was in the original movie Raising the Sun. He also did Hogan's Heroes. He directed the film Spook Who Sat by the Door, which I did. But Ivan was a sophomore when I was a freshman in Carolina, and he was an actor. He was in a play there. One of the guys in my freshman class, Martin Golar, was also an actor. These guys had done Philip Morris Theater Radio in New York. I'd never known anybody who was, you know, going in that direction at all. I knew musicians. And that was that. But for me, I still had a problem standing up reciting in class. So I, you know, I was 37 years old. I was 36 when I started taking classes. And it resulted in doing community theater in Washington, and professional companies would come down from New York, and they'd have a role they hadn't cast, and they didn't want to pay. They wanted to get somebody, you know, who could do it for free. And of course, you know, I had the bug by then, you know, and I started getting these great reviews in the newspapers in Washington, and then my people at the FAA knew why Jimmy was taking used up all of his sick and annual leave.
So you were still in your traffic controller when you started acting?
Absolutely,
okay.
absolutely. And the time the chief controller was a guy named James Boyle, and Jim Boyle called me and he said, you know, when I was young, man, I wanted to be a musician. He said, you know, he said, you got a great future here. You know, this is something that's, the public has now recognized that we are here and how important our function is. They're ready to pay us. And you are a controller. You don't become a radar controller overnight. You're 5-6 years experience. Why don't you just, you know, I mean, that's, you know, you're doing this because you're having fun, right? I said, yeah, I'm having fun. He said, but you're in a profession, you're in a, I mean, that's, you know, that's something that, you know, people grow out of because, you know, it's, and I said, you know, I'm really quite serious about this, and I said, and I'm confused. I said, I never knew that I was going to feel this way about this. I said, but, you know, all of a sudden, people have convinced me that, I said, I've worked with actors who've come down from New York, and they said, you don't belong, you belong in New York. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, we can't go on like this. He said, why don't you take some time off and get this out of your system, and then come back to us and tell us that that's over. Well, a year later I wrote them a letter and come back. I'd gone to New York and I had been in New York a month and a half and auditioned for the New York Shakespeare Festival, and they hired me for that summer in the park. And I never stopped.
What role did you have? Which play was it? Do you remember?
Well, I had done Comedy of Errors in Washington, and when I went to New York, no, I did Tempest in Washington. I went to New York, the first play I did was Comedy of Errors, and then I did King John, and then I did Aaron the Moor and Titus Andronicus. Yeah.
Those are some heavy roles. Those are some heavy plays.
You know, it was...
Maybe not Comedy of Errors.
No, Comedy of Errors was the most fun I had, and I was a part of the ensemble in that, and we juggled, we tumbled, we walked stilts, we did clog dances. We had a Russian circus company come to one of our performances, and they said, these guys must be professional. We had Hubby Burgess, who was president of the Circus Technique Society, teach us, and here I was with these kids who were in their 20s. I was 36, 37 years old. And, you know, it was like I was having a ball, you know. And then, you know, the next show I was doing speaking roles, and then the next one I was doing the principal. But it was, and it, you know, there were things in between. I ramrodded the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. I drove an 18-wheeler to all the Puerto Rican neighborhoods in New York, and with no crew, and got kids in the area in the schoolyards where we putting on the show to help me set up this set, and you know, just and we had. Lydia down below me here is engaged to a guy named Felipe Luciano, who was a young lord. Geraldo Rivera was their lawyer back in the early 70s, but the guys who were in this show were people like Raul Julian, Rafael Campos, Jose Perez, Lucy Boscana. I mean, this is the creme de creme of Puerto Rico. Miriam Colon, kid who did Pawnbroker with Rod Steiger. So it was a fun experience, because I had taken a job driving nails. A friend of mine, Roz Cash, I lived on 88th Street in Central Park, who lived across the street from me. I said, you know, she was an actress, and I said, I need a job. And she said, well, can you bang nails? You know, I said, yeah. She said, I'm doing a show called Bury a Cousin at the Bowery Lane Theater. Talk to the stage manager. So it was one of these revolving stages, and the motor had broken down, so I found myself cranking this damn set around with it. And finally, when I did La Carreta with the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, they said, you know, the stage manager said, you got to stop doing this. And I said, why? I said, I'm making money. I need to make some money. He said, no, but you're good at this, and people will, you'll go in for an acting job, and they'll say, hey, no, we got this job for you. You know, don't do this. New York was a blast, and we had a great mayor at the time, John Lindsay, who was in favor of the arts, and he had the city of New York buy the Anspach Library, and he had them leased it to Joe Papp for 99 years for $1 a year. And that was, you know, the New York Shakespeare Festival. Joseph Papp was an incredible man. He started in Sheep's Meadow in Central Park with an ox cart. Othello, William Marshall and Ellen Holly. And finally Andre Delacourt built him a 2,400 seat amphitheater. Then he got the public theater, and he started taking shows, developing in there. They had Jerry Ragney and those guys, and he developed it down at the public theater and then put it on Broadway. It was Hair. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, just one show after another. It was a great time in New York.
How long were you there?
10 years.
So from about 36 to 46, thereabouts?
Yeah, I was near 50 when I came to this town. That guy right there. That was actually I shot that of myself because I did a book cover for an actress named Ellen Holly, who did, she wrote a book called One Life to Live. She was on the soap One Life to Live. For 17 years, she started as a character, Carla Benari or something, and they thought she was Italian. And then they brought Lillian Heyman on as her mother, and they said, oops. And they got all kinds of letters and protests or whatever, and, but it continued. She did it for 17 years. And, so she wrote this book, One Life, and I photographed for the cover, the dust cover. But I loved it in New York at the time. It's not the same anymore. I mean, it's only rich people live in New York City now. I mean, it used to be truly every culture you could think of, and it was not, as they say, an amalgamation. There were these neighborhoods, these clusters of neighborhoods, and these people spoke their language, and you were not going there at night, but in the, I mean, 61st Street and First Avenue was Yorkville. This was all German. And then Canal Street, one side was Chinese, the other side was Italian. The Puerto Ricans were on Columbus Avenue and up to the Fulton Fish Market, and the blacks were in Harlem, and the Irish were what they now call Soho, which is south of Houston Street. And it, this was New York, and the dock workers were in Hell's Kitchen, where I lived. Now the docks are boat marinas, That was like the end of the last days of very exciting city.
What got you started? Because you were older when you started acting. What was
with a wife and 3 children. What got me started was that guy right there. See that guy right there? And, let me get this for you.
Sure.
This is Roscoe Lee Brown.
Oh, I recognize him.
Absolutely. Now, you notice a part of this picture is this. Roscoe was one of the greatest 800-meter men in the world. And when I was in high school, I met Roscoe because I ran the same event. Roscoe came to Washington to do a play called Brecht on Brecht. It was written by Bertolt Brecht, and it was a combination of his stuff and Kurt Weill. And Roscoe was elegant. He was articulate. He was.
I can't place him, but I hear his voice.
Oh yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, and I had. There was a group of us who used to go to a place on 11th and Kenyon called Mr. J's, and it had a basement and an old rickety piano, but nobody ever went down in the basement. So some friends of mine and I, one being Roberta Flack, would go down there and just mess around. Roberta would play piano. Max Julian, who was an air traffic controller at the time, and his girlfriend, and I think there was somebody else. You know, we play around. I mean, I was a fan of the spoken word. I like, read poetry and stuff. And this was the time of coffee houses and, what have you. Well, Max went to New York. Now, Max did Heman in Antigone at Howard University. He went to New York, and Max met Roscoe. Max was a hell of an athlete also. Max left air traffic control and went to New York. Max had only been there for like 2 years when he left. He never became a controller. He was an assistant controller. And Roberta and the group that we hung out with were Brooks Brothers. We met some kids who rode motorcycles. These were white kids, and they were artists. They came in on us one night, and we became friends. So every weekend we would hook up. One of the guys named Allen Early made wrought iron furniture, and I went to buy a bench from him. And Roscoe was in his house. Now Roscoe was the kind of person who was a collector of people. He could meet anybody. He could get into any situation. Lester Rollins talked about sharing a dressing room with Roscoe in New York when they did Benito Sereno. And he said, you open the dressing room door and there was no telling who would be there. So I went to Allen's to get this wrought iron bench, and there was this guy. He was very thin at the time, three-piece suit, sitting on the sofa, and Allen introduced me to him and said, Jim Preston, Roscoe Lee Brown. Jim Preston. He reached in his pocket and he pulled out this notebook. And he read off my address, telephone number. Huh. And then he laughed and he said, you know Maxwell, Max Julian. And I said, yes, I know Max Julian. Max, he said, Max told me if I wanted to meet some people in D.C. to call you, blah, blah, blah. They said, I'm doing a show at the Washington Theater Club. Why don't you come? So I said, yeah, it's like this guy who I was warming up under the stands in Franklin Field in Pennsylvania, and this guy came jogging up next to me and said, "Lift, lift." And as he went by, it was Roscoe. And this was when I was like 16, 17 years old. But so I went to see the play, and I was like overwhelmed, and it's like, hey. So he said, "Would you like to go to a party?" And I looked at this guy, I said, "This guy is a little on the I said, well, I don't know." He said, "Well, it's a party after party of Othello at Arena Stage. Brock Peters is doing Othello." And I said, "I can't go to an after party. I haven't seen the play." And he said, "I haven't seen the play." Well, we go down to Southwest to this guy Morris Ingalls' house, who owns a restaurant that's a very famous actors hangout, and we go to this party, and the cast of Othello is there. And all of a sudden I get very popular because they find out that I'm not an actor, and so all these actors can talk about themselves. So there's this little woman, red hair, freckled face, about 50, who keeps watching me. So at a moment, and she said, "Did you come down just for the play?" She was standing next to me all of a sudden. I said, "I'm not an actor." And she said, "You're not?" I said, "No." She said, "You should be." I said, "Why?" She said, "You move, you have a presence, blah, blah, blah." I said, "No, that's something I've never been interested in." She said, "Well, if you ever are," she said, "I have a class at the Washington Theater Club. You might like it, And I said, "No," I said, I couldn't do that. And she said, "You ought to come." She said, "I need some men. I have 7 women to every man." Well, one day after my shift, I was hanging out with a guy who was a helicopter pilot, and he wanted to go somewhere and hang out. I said, "Hey, I know an acting class where you go." "No, an acting class." I said, 7 women to every man. He said, "Let's go." So we went to the class, and we were sitting up and I said hello to Louise Brandwin, and she was a transplant from Actors Studio in New York, and her husband was an architect who got a job in Washington, so she came with her 2 children to Washington to live. So she said, "You can't just sit here. You have to get involved." And I said, No. So yes, you have to get involved. So we played one of these theater games, and it was fun, I came back the next week. And she began to talk to me. I said, "What?" I said, I said, "I like this, but I don't know, there's so much to learn. I don't know." And she said, "No, there isn't." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "No, there isn't." She said, "What I'm going to do is to teach you everything that you know. And that's your craft. The things you know, you don't know, you know. And the things that you know, but you can't use, I will show you how to use it." She said, You don't need to learn anything else. You have a strong voice. You move well. So on we went, and I took her class when I could, and after about 6 months, she said, I'm having a show case in my upper level class. We don't have enough men. I need some, So I did that. And the owner of the theater, they did Dermot's Deadly Game there. It was a professional theater. And they needed someone to do a deaf mute, and my teacher's technique was to teach you to work without dialogue. The owner of the theater, who was a woman, took me to Bromwell Fletcher, who was Rex Harrison's alternate in My Fair Lady, who was directing us, and said, this is the man I was telling you about. And he looked at me, he was sitting at the table in a restaurant, and he looked up at me and he said, yeah. So I did Dermot's Deadly Game, then I did The Tempest with Lester Rawlins, and it just kept going. And I had a couple of friends who would come and from air traffic control religiously. And I asked them not to tell anybody, they were close friends, and I guess I messed around that way for about a year before I just, this thing happened that it was like the next step. I was doing a prologue to Gallows Humor at a small theater, and Billy D. Williams was doing Slow Dance in the Killing Ground at the Washington Theater Club. He didn't come on until the second act, and he was the whole show from then. And he said, well, you're an actor? And I said, yeah. He said, where are you working? And I told him at the theater lobby. I said, it's about 10 blocks from here. He said, well, I'm going to come see you. And I said, how are you going to do that? You're doing this play. And he said, I don't come on until the second act. So he walked down there and watched me do my prologue. The next time I saw him, he said, you don't belong here, you belong in New York. Well, that's, after, well, I took my wife and children and off we go to New York. My wife hated it. She said the people were too friendly. The women were too friendly. The theater people hug everybody, and all that. She took the kids and went back to D.C., but every damn chance they got, Christmas holidays, summers, they would be right there in New York. My girls, my son didn't much, he's not a big city type, but my girls were. Well, my oldest daughter majored in theater. She got a degree in theater from Howard. And, went to Europe with the Howard Players. They were backing up the Broadway company of Raisin. And she got to do Ruth in Bern, Switzerland. And they asked her would she come and do a play there. And she came back home and she said, they're doing West Side Story and they want me to do Anita in West Side Story. She said, I guess, this one right here, she said, I guess I'm as close to a Puerto Rican as anybody they've seen there, so so off she goes. get a call from her, and she said, "Guess what?" I said, "What?" She said, "They're doing it in German." I said, "Serve you right." So she was in Bern for a year, I think, and she met this kid. She's also a singer, who was a keyboard player. His father was a Nigerian and his mother was Swedish. And he was going home. He was playing in Switzerland. And he said, "Come go to Stockholm." 15 years. Yeah. And then my ex-wife sent me a CD and said, "Listen to this." I listened to it. She said, "What the hell is that?" I said, "I don't know, babe." She said, "Well, it ain't no Scotty I know." So I talked to her, when I talked to her, I said, "You know, what they loved about you, you've lost. You've become a Swede. All of that soul that you had when you went there is gone." Well, she came home.
So was she singing, and
She was singing, yeah.
what was the
She was singing pop. She was
Okay.
singing pop, but she didn't have any of that grit she had. The grease was gone. And she came home, was home for about a year and married Dawn. And they had a child. Yeah.
Do you want to take a little break?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are returning to the interview, and this is a good time, I think, to ask, because you got your start in theater, when did you get involved, when and how did you get involved with television and film?
I guess the first television I did was, I did a KCET show called Hard Traveling. It's a Millard Lampell thing from the 30s about hoboing. And the guy who directed it was Glenn Jordan, who was a Harvard graduate, and he was affiliated with the Eugene O'Neill Playwrights Conference. He introduced me to that and Lloyd Richards, and this was a conference where 14 actors read 20 plays, stage readings. You have major newspaper critics who are dramateurs, and they will stick with the play while it's rehearsing and when it's read, and then they and the actors critique the play for the writers, and he has the end of the conference to do the rewrites, and they may read it again at the end. But it had such a successful following that this was in Waterford, Connecticut, at the Eugene O'Neill estate, that producers would catch a train up, catch a cab up, and there was always full houses to watch these plays, readings, and they said to the actors, "Well, all you have to do is just read the play." Of course, you got producers coming, you got directors coming, and you're talking about all you have to do. What you're doing is you know, the writers want you to perform it, the directors want you to perform it. You're protecting your ass because you don't want to ever look bad on stage, so you're doing a performance as best you can, so you're using that script as every kind of prop you can think of. And a lot of successful plays continue to come out of the Eugene O'Neill Playwrights Conference in Waterford. There, one of the actresses was Marsha Mason, who was married to Neil Simon, did The Goodbye Girl, what have you. Marsha was a really good friend, and she started going with the producer of Another World, Paul Rush. She brought him to see a play I was doing off-Broadway in New York, and said, well, Paul, you say you always say you like theater actors. You like that actor? He said, yeah, he's great. Give him a job. So he gave me a job on the soap, wrote a role in the soap. That was the first tape I ever did, soap opera. It was kind of interesting, strange kind of thing. I mean, you know, you went to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. They shot in Brooklyn, a limo picked you up at a specific spot in Manhattan. You went to work. You did a read-through. The women went to makeup. They went to hair. You did a run-through. Then they put them in the clothes. You did a dress run-through. Then you shot the show. And most of the people who've been doing those things for years did not come to work having even read the script. They'd read it with the run-throughs and the blocking, and by the time it's time to shoot the tape, they had it. You know, that was what it was. Another day. They had done this character. They had made this character. This character was them, and that was it. The women came to work. You didn't recognize them. By the time they did hair and makeup, oh, that's who that is. So, you know, that, and then I did a picture called Mississippi Summer, which was a cheapo. This guy Bill Byers was a friend of Robert Downey, and Robert Downey Sr. and Brian De Palma. They all three were running buddies, and we did a cheapo called Mississippi Summer by the Civil Rights Group. We did it in New Jersey, up south, and it was up south, believe me. And the next film I did was Spook Was Set by the Door, and I did that out of New York. So one day, a playwright I had worked with at the Eugene O'Neill, we became friends. He was a professor at the University of Bowling Green, and I had gone out there to do artist in residence. So let's go out to L.A. Jimmy, hang out for a minute. So we went out to L.A. Came out to L.A. We was in L.A. about a week, and Joan Scott, who had been an agent in New York, Henderson and Hogan, called me, and I said, what the hell is she calling? Where'd she get my number from? I don't even know. She said, you know, you can't freelance out here, and we'd be glad to have you. So why don't you come talk to me? I went to talk to them the next day. They sent me to see Norman Lear, and they asked me to audition. They gave me a script from The Good Times, and they asked me to. They said, well, we don't have a script right now, so we'll just use this one. So it was the John Amos part that they had asked me to read. You know, I said, what do you want from this? I said, you know, it's like you interested in Macbeth, but you give me a script for Othello to read from. What is it? You know, oh, well, you know, just do what you see in the script. So I did, you know, and they were very pleased, and they said, well, actually, we're having trouble with John. I said, no. He was holding out for more money, you know. I said, forget it. I said, I won't put nobody's shoes on. So Norman said, I'm developing a new show called All's Fair. You and Richard Krenn will be political columnists, and Bernadette Peters will be a reporter, and Salome Jens is going to be Richard's assistant. Well, I said, hey, you know, so he said, meanwhile, you'll just do guests on our show. So I did Good Times Jefferson's All in the Family. And when the show was ready, I did All's Fair. And we had a lot of kids who came in who had never been any place, like Michael Keaton. The actor who does NCIS.
Mark Harmon?
Mark Harmon, it was his first. Norman had 5 shows at the time, and he thought he owned the world, and he told CBS he wasn't going to do it for the money that they were offering. It was a great show. And we did 22 episodes, and they went back and forth over the summer, and I was in Maryland at Agnes's, and I got a call from Norman. He was calling all the actors and apologizing because his bluff didn't work. They told him to so I went back to New York. You know? And you know, I kept getting hired to go out to oh, I know what happened. They asked me to come out and audition for Albert Brooks to do, he was doing a show called Real Life. And I went out to audition for Albert. Very strange man. He had me read every scene that I had in this whole script. His producer said, you know, I think Albert is a little nervous about black men. So I said, what? He wrote this role, you know. The guy was a psychologist. So anyhow, he decided that he wanted me. Well, his producer, who was a lady, said, you know, J.A., Albert had, this role was between you and Dick Anthony Williams. And Albert said that Dick Anthony had too much street in him. And she said, he really didn't look into you very carefully. Because you got way more street than Dick Anthony. But what difference does it make? I'm playing a very conservative, sophisticated, and it was a really interesting project because there was no objectivity because Albert wrote it, Albert produced it, Albert directed it, Albert starred in it. But it was like an underground cult thing, and Larry Kasdan, who was an admirer of Albert, saw me in that and called me in for Body Heat. And that's how those things happen.
Was the how did you like that work compared to theater?
The film I liked. The television I didn't. The television was fast. You know, you might get hired today and go to work tomorrow. You might get hired today, go in for wardrobe tomorrow, and then go to work the next day. In theater, you had 3, 4, 5 weeks rehearsal. You had the chance to turn this character inside out and upside down. And you felt more secure and fulfilled every time you did a television thing. You walk away and you think of 50 things that you wish you had done, but you really didn't have time to explore it. When we did Body Heat, Ted Danson and I were in California. Bill Hurt and Kathleen Turner were in New York, and they brought them out to LA. And we read the script and went to lunch for 3 hours and came back drunk. And read the script with all kinds of accents, but we got to know each other, and this is what the director wanted to happen, so that what was not written would be inherent in what we knew about each other. And that was a really good experience. We really had fun doing that. And there's just so much, you know, episodic television shoots 8 pages a day, 6 to 8 pages a day. Film will shoot 1.5 pages a day. So those are those are the differences. But it's a world of difference in doing it live and feeling what's coming from the audience. I mean, you do a film, you don't know what it is. You don't know what it is until it's on the screen somewhere and people say, oh, wow, blah, 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 because you don't know what's going to be in it, what's not going to be in it, how it's going to be put together. I wouldn't watch dailies to save my life, because half the time you're doing something you think you're doing, and you go watch it, that ain't what's coming across. So it's better not to watch it, because then you start changing stuff and it's not consistent. So it's it can all be fun. It just depends on who you're working with, and it's and how really aggressive the stars are, because they can just make your life miserable.
Is acting for a live audience different than acting? I mean, I guess not. You just mentioned you weren't really sure what the final project was going to be until you saw it on the screen.
Well, the film.
The film, yeah. But acting for an audience that is there. I mean, I imagine there's different technique to that versus acting in front. Did you have trouble with that transition?
No.
No? Okay.
I don't think most people do. They just know when they do film that this is going to be a walk in the park, and that is going to depend on what the camera thinks about you. Because you do a film, you don't have to project. You don't have to worry about whether the people up in the second balcony are going to get what you're doing. It's all those nuances that you can do, because that camera is right up here, and it's going to pick up the twitch of your eye, whereas it ain't going to happen on stage. So No, there are people who can't do film. There are actors who have not been able to be successful at film because it's going to see inside you. It's going to see whether or not you are telling the truth. And on stage, nobody can tell that. They're separated from the camera. So it's the technique is not something that's going to give anybody trouble, because I've seen people who were really big on stage who we had a situation. I did a thing called that shot with me and the Native American, and there was High Noon Part 2. And Pernell Roberts and Lee Majors were both in the film, and David Carradine. And we had a scene where Lee Majors is on a horse, and Pernell Roberts is on the ground, and they're talking to each other. And Pernell is going, blah, 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 blah. And Lee's going, and Pernell wanted to kill everybody in production because they told him he was too flamboyant. That was the direction that he got. Because he was talking like somebody who was on the outdoors talking to somebody who was up on a horse. And Lee is speaking like he's in a woman's ear or something,
Mm-hmm.
That's all he needed to do. See, the first things I did was a thing called The Detective, which was a 1-hour series when I came out here. And I was working with David Jansen. And David Jansen talks like this. And he's 4 people over from me. He says, nothing happens. The director says, J.A., it's your line. I said, oh. We do it again. I said, hey, I can't hear him. He said, yeah, I know. I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, when you see his lips stop moving, say your line. But that's, it's a lot of the people who do movies and television, or special television, and I don't think so much anymore, but a lot of them, came to Hollywood, and they never did theater, and they never had to project, and they never had a voice, and they do the hell out of that. And now you got these people who are whisperers, and what they come across is somebody who's whispering, blah, 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 because they're talking down here. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult when if you watch it on television, it's truly difficult because you turn it up. And then, boom, you got the, so it's like, what the hell? Yeah, the equipment is wonderful, it's magnificent, but please, you don't even talk that soft in real life. So there are all those little things that you run into. I mean, one of the God, and there used to be so many prima donnas in television. They'd find any. Why is he standing in my eye line? Because he couldn't remember their lines. So all of a sudden they get stuck in make some excuse like somebody's standing in their eye line, you know. Or they say to the director, because you do something really cool with a line, they say to the director, I think I should have that line. You know? And you just like, okay, okay. Oh, buddy, you know, and I found that among the really hip professionals, that kind of thing never happens. You know, it's like it was like doing a Few Good Men. Everybody came to work prepared. Everybody did their thing, you know, and that was, you know, and nobody asked for anything special or you know, it was. But you know, these television divas that, you know, and some of them, you know, Tom Selleck, I did a Magnum PI, and they tease me to this day, Roger Mosley and Tom Selleck. My agent said, J.A., they want you to do Magnum PI. The scripts, where are you? I said, I'm out on my way on this. They delivered the script to your door. It's two-parter. The only Magnum PI that was shot in L.A. You know, I thought I was going to Hawaii, right? I said, okay, but you know, and Tom Selleck said, you know, he said, I really want to do movies. He said, but I don't, you know, it's just, Ted Danson made all the money in the world and got to be a star, and after Body Heat on this thing where he played this guy on this bar. But he never could do a starring role in a movie. It just didn't buy him. He didn't want it. It was all right for him to do that little part that he did in Body Heat, but the movie did not want him. And there's some people that, you know, Tom Selleck, you know, is, I watched his Jesse Stone series. Lovely. It's shot for television. And he's just never been able to get to, you know, movies. And he's a lovely human being, you know. Just, you know, the big screen is too big for some people, you know, and it doesn't make any difference how big or how small you are. I mean, it's like Jack Nicholson is a guy who you wouldn't pay attention to if you saw him on the street, you know. I mean, but he blows it up when when he's on screen. And that's, you know, camera loves him.
It seems too, though, in recent years, the television writing has gotten so much better than it used to be.
Oh my God, yes.
I don't go to movies anymore.
No,
I shouldn't be injecting. I'm sorry, but a lot of my friends don't either because.
Well, look at all the movie people who have gone to television. No, television writing is, and it takes they take a bit more time with it, you know. I remember British actors used to say, "You people out of your damn mind. There's no way in the world we would do what you do in the time that you get to do it." You know, it's like you shoot an episodic show in 7 days. That's it. One take, two takes. Unless you're messing up, you do 3 takes or so, but it's, you know, you don't get really what it would amount to a rehearsal on the set. The director of photography knows the look of the show, and they set up the blocking with your stand-in, and then you come on, and it's already set up. That don't work for you, that's too bad.
Mm-hmm.
You take your money and cry all the way to the bank, but you know, this is what you got here, you know. Yeah, sure, it's a hell of a lot better. I love, I collect detective series, stuff like that, and they're all British, because it's not a whole bunch of shooting and stuff like that. They really got a case that they're solving.
What do you like?
Well, Morris, who's he's gone now. There's Jack Taylor. Damn, I got so many of them in there. I can't even, at this moment I can't. But I bought some old stuff that's American, and I say, wow, they cut so many damn corners. I mean, this is not even logical, you know, you just accept, you know, whatever it is that they laid out there, you know. But no, you know, and it's not that their craft is any better than ours. It is that they take more time. Everybody takes more time. I mean, we're doing this, and now they're taking the time. They're, you know, guys like Belisarius and Charlie Johnson, you know, do West Wing and stuff like that. You know, and television is more of a female-friendly vehicle now than it used to be, because the women were always stupid, and they were there for glamour or something, you know. But you know, now they are in take charge roles and stuff like that, you know. And they have not just the glamour stars, the like what was this woman's name? Those three actresses. Charlie's Angels. The lead actress.
Farrah Fawcett?
No, Farrah Fawcett was a good actress, but
Kate Smith? Kate Jackson?
Kate Jackson, not Kate Jackson, the one who.
Jacqueline Smith.
No, she did Wonder Woman also.
Linda
Carter. Linda Carter. See, this is the kind of women they used to have doing these lead shows. You know, glamour couldn't work their way through act their way through a paper bag, but Farrah Fawcett could act, and she proved that she could act. Linda Carter has never proven she could act. When we did that High Noon Part 2, had to go through this crying in your beer with Lee Majors about Farrah Fawcett. I mean, it's like how he ever got together with this woman, I will never know. I mean, just, he's like Kenny Rogers. I mean, any woman over 18 is too old for them. I mean, this is the way they were. And how he ever got someone who was as mature as Farrah Fawcett, you know, she just said, hey, I had enough of you, and split. You know. But I guess some people grow in their craft, and others just continue to do what they've been doing. And I guess if it's working for you and you're making a lot of money and you're having a lot of fun and you've never been serious about the craft to begin with, then you just stay there. And there's some people who go from one job to another, and this is what they want. And there's some actors and actresses who never are satisfied in terms of their craft. They're always trying to go one step further. And when you stop doing that, it's time to quit.
Do you have a few roles that stand out to you as times where you were really challenged by the character and really wanted to try something because it was so different from what you had done before? Or, I mean, does anything stand out?
I've always, well, I had those kind of challenges in theater. But I always, well, with film, I always wanted something that was challenging, because it got to be a point where I had to make something out of every role that I did, because they all got to be pretty much the same. You know, it's like I got to be an authority figure, and that was the end of the road, see, and truly unsatisfying. So, you know, I feel like I've never had a real challenge in terms of a role here. I've had roles that I love doing because there was a certain excitement in doing what they were, and they let me do something a little different. But no, I challenge. No, I had to.
Why do you think you got authority roles?
Because I made them so. I wasn't afraid of stars, and if my job was to be their boss, they knew damn well that that's where it was coming from. And I was not afraid of hurting their feelings. You come with a craft, you have a presence, the only way they can stop you is that your dialogue is under their close-up. You are not on film. On stage, if you ain't cutting it, you're in trouble because everybody's visible. So you got to cut it on stage. You know, movies, television, the star, they're weak and they're protected. The person who's eating them up is not on camera. And you know, for a minute I said, okay, I'll learn to play these people. And I said, no.
So you have turned things down?
Oh my God, yes. Hell yes. My agents were always pissed at me. But it was like, there was stuff I didn't want to do. I mean, it was stuff that was non-productive. I mean, it was like going backwards. I do Few Good Men, and the next thing they're sending me up for is Martin Lawrence show. You know, because what that thing was about was the commission. You know, what the hell? You know, it's payday. The problem that I had, and I realized that, but I just didn't want to. I just never had that inclination. Was I needed a press person, a PR person, and I needed a manager. I had an agent, but you need a manager, you need a PR person. And when I went into the business, when I decided to go into the business, I had a friend in D.C. who was a singer, and a wonderful painter, but he worked as a welder, and he just never wanted to show people his art. He never wanted to, I don't know what Harry's problem was, but Harry said, this is not a business for you. You shouldn't be in this. And I said, why? I said, you just are not going to be able to politic. You're not going to be able to be a sycophant. This is not the business for you. Please. I love the art. I love the, you know, the whole, I didn't even think about the fact that there were people who grew up in this business and they were housebroken. They smiled all the time. They knew the right things to say, you know. I was a bull in a china shop. So, you know, that's all a part of it. I mean, you know, they used to say you get hired at the parties, you know. People like you. They want, you know, you get hired. I didn't want to go to the parties, you know. I was really afraid to go to the parties because I felt like I was going to say the wrong thing, you know. Somebody asked me what I felt about something, I was probably going to tell them, you know. So that was, it's show business. I mean, that's the reality. It is show business. And that was the element I was lacking in. And
do you think it ever cost you anything that could have been like a substantial role?
Oh, many times.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Things you really wanted?
I don't know whether there were things that I really wanted, because you know, if you get a script, you sit down and you read it, and you start to, it starts to happen in your head. I mean, you can see all the characters, and you can see yourself in that role, and that happens when you're working on a role, and then you go to rehearsal, and it's all different. The director doesn't want that, you know. You've done all this homework, you know. Well, but I did get to do some really wonderful stuff in theater. I remember I was with Jerome Robbins' American Theater Laboratory, and I'd gone to do Othello with the National Shakespeare Company, and the guy who was directing it was an absolute madman. He sat at a desk at rehearsal, and he had this 16-year-old girl sitting next to him. He blocked the show the first day, you know. Actors on your feet, I mean, you know, and you go here, you go here. You don't even know what you're doing yet, you know. And the guy said, I said, well, look, this doesn't work. I can't, you know. He said, well, we'll just cut that. Now, you're cutting Shakespeare because it doesn't go with your blocking. Well, we get to the end of the played the blocking at the end of the play, and he said, Desdemona's not going to come. I question Shakespeare's knowledge of medicine. Desdemona is dead. She does not come back and say, you know, that explain that she loved the Moor and blah, blah, blah. I said, hey, you know, it's an integral part of the play. And he said, well, stop being an intellectual and just do what I say. So I took his desk and shoved him and his desk up against the wall. I said, I want out. That's it. I want out. He said, well, you really have some gumption. I have to admire your gumption. I said, I want out. And I went to the guy who had the theater company, and he said, I'm not going to let you out. And I said, well, you know, this is a touring show. And I said, all I needed to give you is 2 weeks' notice, which I give you now, and you're going to be out on the road looking for an actor. Well, they let me out. I called Michael Kasdan, who had been Jerome Robbins' business manager, and I said, Michael, I said, I'm looking for a job. He said, I heard you were doing Othello. And I said, yeah, well, I'm not anymore. He said, I said, it's a long story. He said, you can tell it to me sometime. He said, what are you doing Saturday? And I said, oh, nothing. He said, well, go out to LaGuardia Airport and there'll be a ticket at American Airlines for you to fly to Buffalo. And I said, why am I going to Buffalo? He said, do you mind doing a standby? I said, I'm going to get paid. I don't mind doing a standby. I just need to make some money right now. He said, okay. It's a standby for Jack and Edward Albee's Death of Bessie Smith. So I said, okay, fine. Go up to Buffalo, they pick me up, take me to the theater and the Studio Stage Arena. And you go in on the ground level, and then the theater seats go all the way down to the stage. And it's a round stage, it's an arena. So the guy who was directing it, Michael Kahn, said that when I was introduced to him by the stage manager, said, oh, Jim, he said, I don't know why we don't know each other, because we both work for the New York Shakespeare Festival. I said, well, you know, it's one of those things. He said, well, okay. He said, what I want you to do is to go down there on that stage. Here's a script. Have you read it? I said, yeah. He said, do this monologue. I went down and I did the monologue and I cooked. And so I went back up. And Edward Albee was there. I'd seen this man walking up and down with these shades in the back of the theater, and it was dark. So Michael said, Edward, this is Jim Preston. And he said, Edward said, what are you doing this fall? What am I doing this fall? I'm an actor who's going from one job to another. I don't have these jobs lined up. So I said, well, I'm free as far as I know right now. And he said, you want to do this role? I said, what do you mean? He said, do you know why you're here? And I said, yeah, because you need a standby to cover the guy who's doing it. He said, no. You're here to do the role. And I said, well, what about the guy who's doing it? He said, he's fired. He doesn't know it yet, but he's fired. Can you open this show on Broadway in 7 days? And I said, yeah. So he said, oh, why don't you stick around? He said, we're doing my new play this afternoon, and then I'll have somebody take you to the airport, and they'll call you and tell you what time to report to rehearsal. but those kind of things happen, you know, and it was a slick show.
What was it?
Edward Albee's Death of Bessie Smith. Albee wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but he was the hot playwright in those days. But we opened the Martin Beck Theater in Broadway.
Was that your first time on Broadway?
No, Great White Hope was my first time. Yeah.
So you continue to act in theater?
Yeah. Till you know, I was still acting in theater when I did Spook Was Set by the Door. And
But even now, you're.
well, I'm, you know, a kid I knew when I came out here. He was let's see, Ren was I think about 19 or 20, and he and Forrest Whitaker and I forget the other kid. They all hung together and they kind of followed me around because I was experienced pro from New York, and Ren is an artistic director of the Nate Holder Theater, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, Press, I got this role." He said, "What, you know?" He said, "I think I mentioned it to you about 6 months ago." And I said, I don't know what you mentioned to me 6 months ago. He said, but we're in rehearsal. We're getting ready to go in rehearsal now. And he said, let me send you the script. He said, I'll email you the script. And he said, I wish you'd do it. And the director really would really be, she said she'd be honored to have you do it, you know. And and I was a little nervous about it initially because I hadn't done theater in years, you know. So but it was a blast. I really had fun, and there were a couple of people that I had worked with in New York. You know, so it was, and it was a lot of singers. I mean, we had a 15-piece choir, we had 3 quartets, we had a 5-piece band, and there were 4 of us actors who were straight actors in the production. But, you know, we all sang on the big numbers. Thank God. You could have done lip syncing, they would know. But, you know, it was a Greek tragedy done in gospel. So it was, you know, people came and they got to stomp their feet and clap their hands, and, you know, I mean, how can you make a hero out of Oedipus, or a sympathetic character out of Oedipus? But the guy who played Oedipus, there were 2 people who played Oedipus. One was a seeing Oedipus, and one was blind. Ellis Hall was blind, and he was the singer. And the seeing Oedipus was a straight actor, pure actor. Yeah.
And we still haven't really talked about your career as an air traffic controller. I will work our way back around to that. But once you started acting, did you ever look back?
Do I ever what?
Did you ever look back and, I mean, were there times where you thought maybe the security of a air traffic controller job would no?
Okay. No.
Emphatically.
I mean, can you imagine this was like a brave new world. I mean, there were the kinds of people I never, there's such a thing as the real phony. I mean, people who carry off this flamboyance. I mean, like Roscoe. I mean, it's like Roscoe was always on stage. You get to know Roscoe, but he was entertaining, and it was who he was. And so the people in that business had been all of these exciting places and worked all of these exciting places and had all these stories, and they weren't complicated in terms of negotiating friendships. Either they were or they were not, one way or another, and there were all of these codes, unspoken codes, and what have you. I never got sick while I was doing theater. I got sick when I was an air traffic controller, but I never got sick while I was doing theater because I couldn't be replaced. And that thing had to happen, and when I was starting out in Washington and did the Tempest, I had a bad tooth and took too much of something and overslept and missed the performance. And the star of the show was Lester Rollins, and he told me, when I came in, he looked at me very sternly. I mean, he knew I was a beginner, and he said, "You have to go and apologize to every member of this cast." And so I did. It was just the way that was. I mean, it was an unforgivable. But you could depend on these people like you could depend. I mean, there were times. There was times as an air traffic controller where you asked somebody to move an aircraft to another altitude and they wouldn't do it. I can't do it. I can't. It just was another. Like I said, we were all out of the military. All of us were out of the military.
So did you go into the military after undergraduate? Or before you didn't finish?
Sister Agnes was having problems with finances. Recruiters, this was the Korean War had just started, and there were recruiters coming up on the campus. And this recruiter was talking about allotments. It was important to me that my sister finished because it was important to her, and it mattered not to me whether I did then or some other time. But there was nothing I could do really to make enough money to help her because I had no skills really. So they talked about allotments, the recruiters. So I went in and two of the four guys on there followed me. So I was able to send her an allotment, and she was able to use that to. And what happened? I was in boot camp, and they came and got me and moved me to special services, and I said, "Well, what the hell is this?" I said, "Oh, yeah. But you want to ride? You're a world-class trackman. You run for the Navy." And I didn't want to run. I wanted to experience the Navy. I wanted to go someplace. You know, well, I missed the schools that I would have gone to initially, so I started my sea career on deck, gun mounts, that kind of thing. And when we came back from our first tour in Korea, they sent me to Class A radar school. And then I became a member of Combat Information Center team. We chased submarines and put air sorties on target and that kind of thing. And you know, I got to go on a round the world cruise. I got to go to Australia. I lived in the Pacific, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, those places. And that's what I wanted. You know, I wanted to, you know, to experience that. I went back to school when I got out and on the GI Bill. I tried to run, but it wasn't in here anymore. I wasn't willing to hurt myself. You know, it was like, why should I push my body to do this? And it's just, what the hell? Let's have another beer. So, but that's kind of what that was.
And then from there, how did you transition into being an air traffic controller?
Well, there was a guy, Ralph McKnight, who I think he did a lot of an interview in that book that you, Ralph and I were in high school together. And I ran into Ralph on the street one day. And he had this blue blazer on with a patch. And it was an air traffic control, whatever, you know, but air traffic control didn't have any patches, which I found out Ralph got this made. And so, Ralph was that kind of guy. But he told me about air traffic control, you know, and he said, you know, you ought to apply. He said, you were CIC, so you're, I mean, all of this stuff is, you know, and your experience level, and, what you don't know, they, you know. So I went and applied, and at the time, air traffic control was upstairs in a hangar at Washington National Airport. We're called Hangar 6 controllers today, but we didn't use radar. And I was the only one of that group that they sent to the academy in Oklahoma City. The other three guys, Roger McDonald, Harry Burton, and Ralph, were doing on-the-job training. So I went to Oklahoma City, 11 of us from Washington. I was the only black. We got there, the government had booked us in YMCA, and they told me I couldn't stay there. It's 12 o'clock at night. I'm on the street looking for a cab to take me to the black neighborhood. Second Street, 2nd Avenue, I guess. The cab took me to this place called the Young Blood Hotel. I go in this place, big open space and a desk. It's like a old brownstone building. And it was a door on the right that was open, and the guy was sitting there in a powder blue suit, white patent leather boots, and a patent leather head, and the gold in his mouth. And he said, "Hey, cuz, what's going on?" And I said, "Hey, what's up?" He said, "What's with you, man? You lost in here or something?" I said, no, I'm looking for, who do you see to get a room in here? And he said, oh, she's back there. He said, what are you doing in here? You don't live in this town. I said, no, I'm here to go to school at Will Rogers. And the guy lit up. He was like, he said, you're going out there to that school for where those guys go to learn about airplanes and stuff? I said, yeah. And this guy was a hustler, a pimp, but he was so proud. You know, it was, so I get registered up and I get this room, and the next day I get a call from Rocky Bevins, and he said, Jen, he said, man, I heard about what happened to you last night. He said, we're just taking this guy up against the wall. And he says, you can move in over here. And I said, hey, man, I love you guys, you know, but look, I want to go to sleep at night. I said, well, I'm not wanted in a place, I don't want to be there. I said, you know, I'll see you out there at, you know, at Will Rogers. But, none of us were in the same section. I had to team up with the instructor most of the time because I had no partner. But and the Little Rock, Arkansas thing was going on, and so it was ugly. I got through and went back to Hangar 6, and we did, you know, more training, and they put us on the floor, on the boards. And it was, the public doesn't know what kind of danger it was in. No, it really was. We were CAA, I guess, you know. And CAA was under the Department of Commerce, so they had other little spurs that they had to feed also, and there's no budget. We had nothing, you know. And they finally realized that we had a mid-air crash between a Capital Constellation and a jet T-23 out of over at Martinsburg, Virginia, and they tore us a new one. I mean, it wasn't our fault, but we had no representation. Airlines sent their people over, Air Force sent their people over, FAA blamed us. I mean, not FAA, Department of Commerce, those people downtown who didn't know what the hell we were doing anyway. And the guys who were immediately connected were destroyed. One of them committed suicide. And it, you know, it was then I think that we began to educate them in terms of what was really going on. And somebody said, we better do something about this before we really have some more fatalities.
About what year would that have been?
1959, I think.
Okay. And it would still take about 10 more years to start PATCO?
No.
No? Not
No,
59?
no. The union started just after we got to Leesburg, and the reason why the Black Air Traffic Control Union started was because they wanted to do they did their meetings at Goose Creek Country Club, which we were not allowed in. And they came up with some phony stuff about, well, they said you could come in Thursdays, but you had to use the rear entrance. And so it was like, hey, forget it, you know, forget it. Mm-hmm. And that was that whole thing. We're beating you up here.
Me?
Yeah, you're beginning to yawn.
It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. It's this time of day consistently.
What happens at this time of
I
day?
just always get sleepy.
What time of day is it?
But you're not beating me up because I'm very interested in your story. I don't even know what.
It's almost 4, I think, something like that. Is that what you
Well,
got?
time difference, right? Because
What time you?
oh, you know what? Maybe it's part of the time difference. Because for me, normally it'd be about 7 o'clock now.
Yeah, I know. I look.
Do you think I'm an amateur? I don't think I'm an amateur.
No. My sleeping patterns are so messed up because I keep going back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know.
It's the worst time.
Yeah, and it's really crazy
Mm-hmm.
because, and when I go there, I'm really waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm struggling with not my body doesn't know what its clock is,
Mm-hmm.
and I hate it on Monday nights when football doesn't come on there until 8:30. When it comes on here at 5:30, you know. So it's oh,
But
you want a cup of coffee?
I don't think
Okay.
so. No, I don't think so. But Rika told me about the country club issue that that you couldn't join them at the meetings because they always held them at a country club
At Goose Creek,
at Goose Creek.
in Leesburg, and we never went. We never went because of the way that they said you can come. It's like, okay.
It seems like one of those slights that are sort of so intentional, but they try to act like it's not us. Well, if it weren't them, they could have the meeting somewhere else.
Well, the deal was.
And again, I'm sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like one thing we haven't really talked about until now is maybe how racism
Yeah.
would have impacted your career choices, whether it's air traffic control or the military or running or act like anything you decided.
Well, certainly not running, because in my day, the only sport you could compete interracially was running.
Oh, really? Okay.
No contact sports. No contact sports. But certainly, I mean, my introduction to air traffic control was, just in the interviews and stuff like that. I mean, it was like Roger was certainly overqualified. I mean, he was an instrument pilot. Ralph was airborne radar and communications. Harry Burton had a master's in air transportation, and I was CIC. So we certainly had all the credentials necessary to be air traffic controllers. And the 11 guys that I mentioned that we formed a bond that carried on through. I mean, these are the guys who were Rick's mentors after I left. We had all come out of the Korean War together, so they had already had their baptism by fire with integration, as I had at that time, because Harry Truman integrated the services, which was after the Second World War. So we were the first group to go through an integrated service. So these guys were who they were, And, our upgrade instructor, Jack Kelly, was, I remember we all went out to dinner and the guys were talking about what their mothers, ethnically, their mother's uh, uh, favorite dish that she cooked in terms of, and Kelly said, "Jim, what's yours?" And we were in a Chinese restaurant. I said, "Look back in the kitchen, Jack." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Look back in the kitchen." And he looked back in the kitchen, and there were 3 black chefs. I said, "That's what we do." Buddy. Now we played basketball together. It was, when it got to be like 7, all the black controllers lived in Washington. When the center moved to Leesburg, Virginia, all the black controllers lived in Washington. White controllers lived in Virginia. So what we'd say was the Washington controllers were playing the Virginia controllers in basketball, and we used to play every week. When we didn't play basketball, it was during football season, we played football every week. But the 11 of us who went to Oklahoma City together all went through upgrade together. I mean, we all knew each other's wives. We partied together, and we were like a new wave in that center, which was hardcore conservative, because they, those guys were just as much in shock as we were, coming into that group of, and none of them would have been qualified to have come in when we came in, because everything had gone up, all the requirements had gone up, and it was like, this was a grizzled old bunch of rednecks who took chances like you would not believe. So we had a kind of cohesion that allowed us to protect one another, and the guys who started the union, like Ralph Kohlross, they came out of places like Pittsburgh, where they were weaned on unions. And there was no question about it. I mean, they knew what the union was and how to form that. I mean, if you were out of D.C. or someplace like that, the government didn't have unions. So union was something that, in D.C. was a government town. I mean, it's like, that's where everybody worked, unless they worked in a department store or a hotel or something like that. It's like, people came from all over the country to work for the government. So these guys, from steel towns and places like that, knew about unions, and it was a daring thing. I mean, because there was all kinds of threats. I mean, it's like guys walked out. Drew Lewis wasn't about to stand for this with a guy. First of all, Drew Lewis had no background in air traffic control, and instead of having the kind of administrators we had before, like Najib Halaby, General Curtis LeMay, 8th Air Force, I mean, all these people were aviation people. Mm-hmm. And Reagan brought in a guy who was a financier, an economist, who in the final analysis just threw money at him. Didn't really improve the system, just threw money at him. and the threats of saying, you know, what you're doing is illegal, and you're fired. We don't care about how long you've been in this or what, you're fired. And we really don't know enough about the business to know we can't replace you. So now all of a sudden, airlines are going out of business because they can't fly as many planes because they don't have the experienced air traffic controllers to move that stuff anymore. So pilots are losing jobs, stewardess are losing jobs, ground crews are losing jobs because these people don't know enough about aviation. And now the post office has to change because the airlines were subsidized to carry the mail. Here you go. And it changed so many things. I mean, what Reagan and Drew Lewis did changed so many things in the country, not just air traffic control. So whereas right now you could go out to LAX and get a plane going to New York, you can't do that now. You got to wait until they get a full load, and once they get a full load, they can't take off until there's a space there for them to land. Flow control. In those days before the strike, pilot asks for a clearance, you better give them a clearance because otherwise you can't cut it. So they were in the air, and when it got to where they were going, sometimes we had to eat them because the tower, the approach control would slam the door. They said, hey, we can't take them. We can't get them on the ground here. We ain't got no space on the runways. Where we're going to put them? We weren't ready to start with when the 707 came in. We had 4 feet of fixes around Washington. We were dealing with the hottest thing flying was the DC-7, and you could put it in a 15-mile holding pattern. 707 came, if you put it in a holding pattern, it was going to take up 150 miles, which meant it was going to wipe out all of your stuff. Mm-hmm. So you had to, it had to go in, and it was like an 18-wheeler going down a winding mountain road with no brakes. Mm-hmm. You had to put that sucker in. All of those things we had to improvise because they just did things. They didn't consult us. They didn't warn us. It was like they didn't know what the hell the conditions were. I mean, what they were dealing with. So now, what happens when Reagan fires these people? The airlines have to cut down. The large corporations say, I can't put in for a reservation 14 days. I have to leave right now. So what? We buy a corporate jet. If we don't have enough flights, if we don't have enough use for it, we farm it out to other people who need to fly. Now you got more airplanes in the air than you did before because all these people got these jets. And once you get them to where they're going, you ain't got hangar space, you ain't got runway space. Mm-hmm. You start making your commercial jets smaller, and everybody is sitting in there like this because they're smaller, and because the bigger ones can't land on those runways in those smaller airports. The whole system just went to hell. The pilots' salaries went down. Messed up everybody. So it's, you know, I go there. Rick takes me to the center. You know, usually when I come after it's been a while, and you know, we go out to the center and look at the new stuff and see what they're doing, and ask them questions like, "What really happened at 9/11?" But you know, and they're, you know, all forted up. I mean, you know, you got to get ID, this, that, you know, and what have you. And what they're doing is like, those guys couldn't have hacked it when I was the controller, because they don't have the kind of load. It's all split up, so, you know, I mean, if it, you know, if it gets so slow that a guy can fall asleep in the tower, or whatever. But, you know, it, like I said, it was an adrenaline rush. I mean, there was no doubt about it.
You mentioned earlier getting sick. You know, there were so many health issues related to the work of an air traffic controller.
I don't know why Hangar Sixers have all sued them, because we were in a room that the walls were covered with asbestos. And all of the guys that I knew that started with me have died of cancer. Yeah. And I don't know why, you know, that they haven't brought some kind of suit against them for that. I mean, that's just, you know, and straddling those old radar sets, radiation, I mean, you know, it's like, yeah.
And not to mention giving so few people so many shifts, irregular shifts.
Yeah, that's...
I mean, you know, that seems to be a big part of the health issue too, is that nobody got regular sleep.
They had a foundation from Ohio come out before we left Hangar 6, and they took people's blood pressure and stuff while they were working, and they said, they wrote a report and said, you can't do this job more than 5 years. Cut. And that's what that was. But, you know, they used to lie. The pilots used to lie. Mm-hmm. Because we didn't have radar, and they tell us they were in a place where they were not, because they wanted to get they didn't want to be holding. So they say they were closer than they were. I mean, just the only time they didn't lie is when the conditions were IFR and they couldn't see a damn thing. But if it was a clear day, they would lie to you all the time. Yeah. But, you know, I don't know whether they have fam trips anymore, but we used to ride in the cockpit. So we could see what their problems were and explain to them what was going on down there. Mm-hmm. But now, you know, I hear that, you know, you can't go in those cockpits anymore.
Did you ever find that to be helpful? Did you find pilots receptive to that when you would do it?
What I found with those guys was they were talking about girls, and they were saying, hey, let's have another drink. Yeah, I mean, they were a wild bunch. So, no doubt about it. Yeah, traffic controllers are a pretty wild bunch too. They didn't drink on the job, but they sure once they got off from work, it was like, oh, they headed for the first bar. And that was something that acting did for me. I mean, I would get off, I'd go to class and let it all out, while I was doing a play. And the thing about that would be that I would be, if I had an evening shift, I'd be swapping with somebody who worked days. And the guys that that knew what I was doing, who were friends, would always give me their shifts, swap shifts with me. But that, you know, really took off a lot of the tensions. You know, anybody who does a job like that needs to have some kind of release, you know, something. Rick is heart and soul air traffic control. I mean, we've had conversations hours and hours, and we went to a convention once, and they brought up these three guys who were big corporate people who were going to explain how going over to the private sector would fix air traffic control. And we sat there and we looked at each other and smiled. Oh, when they introduced him, he looked at me and we said, "This ought to be good." God. I mean, there were people from the CIA, ex-CIA directors. I mean, it was an expensive convention. But, you know, as most of them, they spin their wheels, and there's nobody there who really is a grassroots air route traffic controller to say, no, that's not going to work. Just, you know, you're going to design this system on the basis of making money and not maximum safety. You've reached your limit now. You've built planes to go higher and higher, but you know, you've reached the ceiling. That was always what the case was. I mean, when we were controlling at Hangar 6, 21,000 was about as high as they would fly, and then the jets came in. And they went up even higher. But then you had to get them down through that stuff. There was airspace up there, but you got to bring them down, you got to get them up. That's where that was.
So,
you hanging in there?
I'm hanging in here, but I want to ask you, you know, we've talked about being an air traffic controller, and we sort of did our stories out of order. So we talked about acting first.
Yes.
And how you sort of segged out of one into the other.
No, I'm used to that. We shoot the ends of a picture, and then we shoot the middle, and sometimes we shoot the beginning.
Maybe we could edit the interview to...
There you are.
I don't have those skills. It'll just be how it is. But I was wondering if there's anything you wanted to talk about that maybe I didn't bring up that you think might be important. And it could be about your work or your life or relationships, or just really open it up to you know, because like I told you earlier, this is as much a record of your life as it is your work. Mm-hmm. So if there's anything that you know, because I just met you today, right? Well, and it's sometimes hard because I meet people and I have to start. I don't get to know you and then interview you, right? Like yeah. Although I think we've done pretty well, all things yes. considered. But if there's anything that's important to you, or you want to talk about mentors or family or whatever, I would love that to be part of this as well.
Well, you know, the thing is that every time I've had to go to school or something, and it's ago you talk to these people, sometimes about theater. I'm never prepared, so my thing is always, you ask me a question and I will answer it. that way you're really creating. Because it's like this is something that you couldn't possibly prepare for. I mean, as an individual being interviewed, I mean, how do you prepare for this? So it's like if you ask me a question, then I can elaborate. But at this point, I don't even know what we've already talked about. So,
Well,
that's interesting. My mother used to believe in when there was these times that she really didn't know what to do with us. We'd go to the park, and it would be a long walk to the park, and we'd sit on the bench and we'd look at the people, and we'd just sit on the bench and we'd look at the people. And then there was the zoo. That was a favorite place that she used to take us. We always wanted to see the sideshow in the circus, but our mother always wanted us to have a more lifted experience, so we'd go to the big top and watch these people swing on the high wires and stuff, and we'd go to school and our friends would be talking about people with an arm coming out of the top of their head. This is the stuff we really wanted to see. So, I think about, God, she really tried hard. I mean, she took us to see Walt Disney's Fantasia, the movie. Scared the hell out of us. I mean, this was psychedelic. And it wasn't that this was something that she really wanted us to experience. It was that it was Walt Disney, and what the hell was Walt Disney doing something like this Fantasia? Was he on an acid trip or something? I mean, it was really something that kids. Most of the kids that have people I've known who went to see that as a kid just really said it scared them to death. And we look at where technology has taken us. Frankenstein, that used to scare people. They watch it now and they laugh. I mean, the Boris Karloff Frankenstein, because this bionic man was a romantic hero, and this guy had all kinds of electrodes and transistors and stuff in his body. They weren't even real human parts. So we've come to that place now where the monster that we create is far beyond. I mean, there was a show on artificial intelligence, and like in the science fiction, they taught the machines to think, and where did they go? Whose morality is programmed into this? The cars can operate themselves, and they want these pilots to relinquish control of their airplane. They're not going to do that. They've been able to land them without the pilot for a long time now, but the pilots are not going to do that. I hope they never do. I mean, they used to have ILS systems that would waver when the wind blew, and people would end up off the glide slope. I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, so what do you do when turn over control to this. We don't have control towers anymore that have radar capabilities. They used to have, all the tower people were GCA, GCI trained. They could take a plane off radar, land on radar. They don't have to be radar rated anymore to work in the tower, because that facility is not downstairs anymore. Washington facility is in the Washington area somewhere, and it has Richmond, it has Baltimore, it has Charlottesville, it has Dallas, it has Reagan. And so all of those towers are just VFR. They do nothing until they can see the airplane. Okay, no radar capabilities at all. They are no longer radar trained. So those things are changing. And they keep trying to improve something that, they sort of don't fix it if it ain't broke. But now we're confused. We don't know whether it's broke or not. So we continue to tinker with the thing. Talking to, they have lecture tours at Washington Center, and the guy who gave us the tour the last time we were there, that you go into a room and you sit in a room like it's a classroom, and then they explain things to you about whatever, and then they take you out in the center. And this guy was talking about all the problems that they were having because the people who were there at the time were people who were insiders. I mean, it was Rick, myself, and some other people who had been air traffic controllers. Yeah, well, when they can explain when a union can sit down and explain to these people what they need besides money, and they listen, then a union is effective. But what does a union usually do? It gets health programs, it gets shorter hours, it gets retirement, better working conditions. But does it ever go for improving the system? I mean, do unions do that? Has that been the function of a union? I don't know. Because even if the people in the union know what it needs, are the people they're addressing this to capable of understanding this and dealing with the systems? So the same thing goes on over and over. Need more employees, less hours, more money, a better retirement, but the system, the thing that seems to be what this all started about. And that is probably the problem in all unions. I don't care. The union that we belong to is not a union, it's a guild. You know what I mean? We strike and they put repeats on. So, you know, that's how that works, and it's, you know, where the power is, they don't send in the National Guard and shoot down the union workers anymore like they did in the 30s, but and this also was about money, those things, but it didn't change the system. The system remained the same. So, are there any questions?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, you were talking about, I had never thought of it from that point. I was just thinking, you were saying they never changed the system. I was just pondering. I was trying to think if I could think of an example where.
Well, is it, you know, is that put to them because usually what they're asking for is those external things.
Right. I mean, I think we might have seen that in, say, cotton mills that were so dangerous to work in, and so much lint would get into, you know, so they would be changing workplace safety.
Well, you're changing technology, but what happened with cotton gins, let's say, the better the technology got, the less employees they needed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was how that system changed. It did not change in favor of the employees.
No.
It just eliminated them.
Yes. And the employees that were left, all the jobs were outsourced.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe I did have a good example. Well, I think that may be it.
Okay.
I appreciate your time today. Like I said, this was a sort of last minute. Let's see if we can work it in.
No,
I think it was just a really wonderful.
I enjoyed it.
interview.
I did. I mean, that's, you know, I've had some interviews and I've had some interviews. No, this was good, and thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.